Dermoth, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to have you on, and we're going to be talking about your journey as a school founder, school leader, and specifically talking about some of the things that are important to prioritize in the early days around building systems and a strong culture from the start. So I'm really excited to dig into that topic with you today. Generally speaking, we like to start with a quick intro to kind of frame the conversation and your experiences. Do you mind giving us the Spark Notes version on how you got to where you are today and in founding South Shore?
Sure, Daniel. Great to be a part of your program today. So, I've been in the charter space for about 15 plus years, and my experience really helped me to experience different communities such as Harlem, Bedford Stuyvesant, Hempstead. During my journey, I had the unique experience of being a great team leader, a dean of curriculum instruction, and then an assistant principal. And then later on, I had the amazing opportunity to serve as a principal of a charter school. And in that role, I really learned how to refine my leadership abilities to really focus around staff development, instructional systems, and operational planning. And during that season of my career, I later on decided to relocate further east on Long Island. And I started to hear some concerns over how the school district was serving students there. And so that led to me putting together a group that wanted to understand more about the community. And so South Shore Charter School came about. And the school really came about through a need that existed in the community. The community wanted more, and there were, decades of just underperforming students' results, across the board. And families really wanted something more to challenge their students and to help them to realize their full potential.
I love it. Well, you hear stories about failed schools, and oftentimes when you dig in a little bit further, you realize people came in and they didn't talk to the community, and they just thought, "Oh, we were successful in this community. We can replicate here." And so it's encouraging to hear sort of the grassroots experience you observed of, "Hey, I live here. This is what people need. This is what they're looking for." Tell us a little bit about what it was like to even consider founding a school. I mean, in New York, I think the SUNY. I think you guys are authorized through the SUNY charter organization, and I've heard through the grapevine that's a very rigorous and challenging process to get through. What was that like deciding, hey, I'm going to do this, and what were some of those early kind of months and years like getting things off the ground?
Sure. So I have to say that starting a school is an amazing experience. I mean, you have an opportunity to really shape the minds of young people and to help them to realize their full potential. And, the experience really taught me that building a school from scratch is not just about academics. It's really about building a community where all stakeholders can truly thrive. And speaking of the SUNY process, I mean, SUNY for sure, I would say is probably one of the most rigorous authorizers in the nation. They push for clarity around every single detail, right? So this is not a sort of like a 20-page document that you're submitting. It's a very extensive plan that you're submitting to really articulate not just your vision, but actual plans for academics, for operations, for compliance and leadership. And so we went through that very rigorous process. And I like what you said about community involvement, because key parts of our school today was really informed through community outreach, because when we had focus groups and we were able to really meet with different stakeholders in the community, we really began to understand what was important to the community, right? So for example, one of the things that we heard constantly was, we didn't want our children to be subjected to gang violence, right? Which is an issue in our area. And so what came out of that is a focus on character education in our school, which is really meant to ensure our students understand that there is a better way and that they don't have to give in to these negative forces that are trying to derail their future. And so, our opening was, I would say, a little unconventional. We were, just months away. We got the approval from SUNY and we started to hit the ground running in terms of, community outreach and really trying to ensure that all the, different pieces were in place. But then our deal fell through for our facilities, right? And
Mm.
then we weren't able to open the doors the year that we had planned to, and we had to actually take another planning year to ensure that we were 100% ready to serve families. And that was
Wow.
a pretty low moment, for us.
Yeah,
I
I can
think
imagine.
it really was. I mean, if you think about, you spend months and even years putting together this plan and ensuring everything is in motion, but then you meet hurdles, right? There were stakeholders in the community who also didn't really understand what our full vision was about, right? And so through that experience, I think, I really learned the importance of staying organized, of really ensuring that I had not only a plan A and a plan B, but that we were thinking through every single detail that was going to ensure the success of our school. I remember during that time, I had a virtual meeting with families to share that we were going to delay our opening. And I remember a mom asking me, Mr. Madison, are the doors of the school truly going to open? We tell
That's a
her
hard
yes.
question.
Right. It really was. It's one of those questions that like stop you in your tracks, right? And I confidently told her, yes, we were going to open. But what that did was I left that meeting really having an obligation to the families to ensure
Mm.
that what I promised was going to happen, right? So, through the experience of going through that planning year, we really used it to our advantage, right? We didn't just sit around and feeling sad, right? We said, you know what? We're going to shore things up. We're going to focus on PD. We're going to focus on curriculum. We're going to focus on coaching. And we're going to ensure that our facilities is ready, it's strong, and that our program will be strong on day.
Well, I think that's the perfect transition to, what we said we were going to talk about around, developing systems and culture really early on. Before we talk a little bit more about some of the things you just mentioned you all focused on, I feel like I'd be remiss not to ask if you have one sort of reflective piece of advice for someone else who might be listening to this that's in a similar founder's journey. Maybe they're trying to find a facility, maybe they're a year or two into the planning process. Looking back on that time now that you're launched and you all are growing, any piece of advice for someone who's in that spot?
Right. I would say hang in there and, to understand that nothing great will happen without adversity, right?
Mm.
And on a practical sense, I would say ensure that you have not only a strong plan A, but a strong plan B as well, right? Because if you put all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak, and then that situation doesn't come to fruition, then you're left with a heartbroken situation, right? So definitely ensure you have not only a plan B, and even a plan C if needed.
Awesome. All right. So, talk to me a little bit about building early systems. So, you mentioned you guys had that extra planning year. And so, rather than let it go to waste, you really, focused on PD and instructional practice and things like that. What do you think is most important, early on around building sustainable systems? Because I think one of the challenges, or maybe, if I were to put myself in the shoes of someone founding a school, I think it it would be easy to say we're not at the scale yet where we need to, like, codify things and build systems. We'll get there in 2 years or 3 years. We just need to survive and get the doors open. What's kind of the other side of that coin?
Sure. And that's such an important question, right? Because I think quite often the mindset sometimes is, well, I'm going to wait for things to go wrong and then create a system in response
Right.
to that. And, I think for us, our main focus was to ensure that we codify systems very earlier on, right? To ensure success. And, if you really think about it, right? Like as a first year school, there can be sort of that temptation to, what, like it's our first year, we're just going to try to get through it, right, and just keep kids in the building, right? But if you really think about the reason why you open a school is so that our students can realize their true academic potential, and also that our families are counting on us. We made a promise to them that we were going to ensure their children are making better gains, right? So with that, we wanted to ensure that we protected instructional time and that we also build confidence in our team, right? So ensuring that there are strong systems early really ensure that sort of like your instructional program is getting off the ground really strong and that you're able to have systems where you can, ensure instruction is happening every day, that teachers are being developed and that you're able to monitor progress along the way. So yeah, it definitely protects instructional time and it also builds confidence in your team, right? There's such a safety in really working within a system. And for a new school where everything is new, I think it's important to create structures where everyone can thrive, right? Whether it's leadership, it's teachers, it's scholars, it's families. So I would say for sure, definitely codifying routines early and having systems in place will ensure that your instructional time is protected and that you can actualize results your first year. And I'll tell you that during our first year of operation, we were able to support 99% of scholars in meeting their end of year goals in ELE on math on the MAP assessment. And
Wow.
that did not happen by accident, right? It happened because we ensured that instructional time was protected in our first year.
So what does that look like? Could you elaborate for us a little bit on some of those systems you're alluding to that you all prioritized in those first year or two? Could you give us a couple examples and how that translates to protecting instructional time or protecting your staff?
Oh, absolutely, right? I think some of our top systems really included instructional coaching, professional development, academic scheduling, and that weekly data cycle that really ensures that we're monitoring the progress of our students, right? So, these were priorities because we knew that they directly influence teacher quality and student achievement, right? So one of the things that I kind of coined in my schools for my instructional leaders is what I call the big three, right?
Okay.
And these are like non-negotiables for our instructional leadership team that they must happen with fidelity every week to ensure that our teachers are being developed, right? So what are my big threes, right? They're sort of like weekly lesson plan feedback, right? Ensuring that there are observations happening every week, at least once or twice a week for each teacher, and really ensuring that leaders are meeting with teachers on a weekly basis to provide coaching and feedback to ensure that they're being developed and that they're growing in their craft so they can show up really strong for students. I remember, in our first year, there was one teacher who she had such heart and potential, but she really struggled with pacing and transitions. And because of the predict system we had in place to support our teachers, we were able to give her feedback on her lesson plans. We were able to go in and observe her. It's so amazing that over the course of 6 weeks, a brand new teacher, fresh out of college, first year in a classroom, we were able to see tremendous growth in her and she was thriving because we had really ensured that these systems were put in place to support our new teachers.
Who's doing the system design? So, when I think about that example of the new teacher that you were able to support because you have a system in place where, hey, we're doing observations, we're giving lesson plan feedback, you're getting coaching, like you're not on your island in your classroom and in our school, which I love that. Who's putting that system in place and how are you operationalizing that early on? And the reason I'm asking this is because I think sometimes system design can feel maybe daunting. And I'd be curious if you have any recommendations on how to approach the work of actually coming up with a system. Like, let's say someone wants to implement better systems and structures for teacher accountability. Where might they start, and how did you all think about that?
Good question. So one of the things I'm really grateful for is that I really brought to this experience a lot of different spaces where I was able to sort of like see different things and how successful those things were in different spaces. And also through research, right? I think sort of like looking at, texts such as like leverage leadership, right? And really looking at those instructional practices that have been proven to really move student achievement in a positive direction and help teachers to really grow. And, I would say that, myself as the executive director, I do have a principal and I have academic deans in my school, and really sitting together as a team and sort of thinking through what's going to be our system to ensure that our teachers are going to meet the growth that we know they're capable of, and how are we going to ensure that they are able to help students to meet the gains that they are clearly capable of. So I would say it's through shared experiences, right? Through many years of being in the space, and also sitting with a team that can also bring to bear their individual experiences so we can align around, okay, these are the things we're going to do to ensure we're moving our school in a positive direction.
Can you give us an example of a system or routine on the operational side that you feel like has really helped kind of protect either instructional time or just staff time in general? I'd be curious, sort of on the non-academic side of the house, where you're seeing this play out positively.
Good question. And I would say for sure that, your operations team can definitely make or break your instructional program. And as I'm thinking about your question, I'm sort of thinking about sort of like, what does arrival and dismissal look like, right? And what is the role of the operations team in that, right? So it can be a simple thing such as, okay, sort of like, how are we going to ensure that on the first day of school, we have a seamless process to ensure everyone knows where they're going, and that, simple things such as like the lunch routine, right? Like where, you don't want your teachers to be like pulled into some sort of like operational like duty. So who is behind the engine, really ensuring that we're thinking carefully around how those parts of the day roll out. But I'd probably say one of the most critical points, it can be complicated for others and simplified for some, but I think it can be as simple as sort of like, how are we communicating with our families, right? And what does that look like? So, when teachers need to sort of like get communication out to families in a new school, what does that look like? Who is behind that engine, right? Or that car that's really ensuring that communication is clear. There are different channels, right? Whether it's social media, whether it's through Class Dojo, whether it's through a paper copy of a letter that's being sent home. Who is ensuring that a teacher is not spending time sort of like, crafting a letter and spending time making copies, right? We want our teachers in the classrooms focusing on instruction and not sort of like using their time to do things that would typically be more operational instead of them focusing on teaching and learning.
I'm curious about the feedback loop for systems, because I would imagine you implement things and then you're meeting with your team to hear, hey, how's this going? What do we need to change? So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how you think about refining systems. And then the second part to this question is, how do you think about system, development or sustainability as an organization grows, and maybe the needs or the demands for fill in the blank teacher support grow with the organization? So I realize I'm kind of putting a two-part question in there, but maybe we can start with feedback loop. Like, how do you think about knowing if your systems are working, basically?
Sure. So, and that's a really important question, and actually something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, especially the second half of the school year. And one of the things that I decided to do was to put together a teacher advisory council, actually, right? And it's essentially a representative from various grades and teams in our school, and I meet with them sort of on a frequent basis to really understand what the teaching experience is like, right? And they're able to then give me feedback on, okay, sort of like, this is our experience with this system and how we do things this way, right? And even come up with really rich recommendations to help us to be even stronger as we thinking about growing year after year. And to answer the second part of your question, right, I think one of the things that my operations team and instruction has been really great at is like, we sort of document everything, right? So for pretty much everything that we do, there's a procedure for it, right? Whether it's on the instructional end, the operational end, we're keeping documents of what we're doing. and fine tuning them, right? So right now, towards the end of the year, for example, we're sort of thinking through, okay, like what are the revisions that we want to make to systems and processes so that they're stronger next year, right? So I think really ensuring that teacher input is a part of that process really helps to ensure that we're putting the best systems forward and that the procedures are fine tuned, but most importantly, documenting them so that when you have new staff members added to your team, it's clear what the systems and processes are.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to, as you grow, making sure that the growth scales with the, the systems that you put in place. Quick, kind of in the weeds, tactical question. Where are the documents? Like, is this, we have these pasted on the walls in the bathroom? Is this where, they're in a Google Docs share folder that everyone has to read? Or, are you training on these? Because the other challenge around systems design is you design the system and then nobody follows it. So I'm always curious about, like, on the execution side, how are people being trained or coached into the system?
Absolutely. So for sure, we put it all together in something we call our operationals manual.
Okay.
And it's a document, right, that lives on our shared cloud drive server where teachers have access to it. But we don't just give it to them and say, okay, this is a thing that you have to read and figure out what we do, right? Over the summer, when we have our professional development session for all our teachers, we're having these conversations through presentations to really unpack what the systems are and to really ensure that we're all aligned around the system along the way. And I would say throughout the course of the year, we're referring to our systems, right? We have our PDs once a month and we're constantly ensuring that systems are highlighted, right? To ensure that we're all on the same page. One of the practices that we have also is sort of like a daily huddle with different grade teams. And I think through those conversations and through those times where we're able to really ensure that we're all on the same page, right? Systems are being discussed, right? So I think, we're not only sort of like creating this document and saying, hey, go and read it, but we're ensuring that there's leadership conversations around it and that we're constantly referring to the languages of what we do.
Awesome. So we've talked about the system side of this, and there's lots more we could go into there, but I want to shift to culture a little bit, because you talked about, part of your founder's journey was really getting into your community, understanding the people, the families, the culture, and out of that, the school was born. How do you see systems and culture influencing each other in a school environment? How are those two related, from your perspective?
That's such a great question. And I would say that culture and systems are really two sides of the same coin if you really think about it. I mean, if your system reinforces your values, they build culture, right? And if they contradict them, they also undermine them as well, right? So there are many cultural practices that we have in our school that helps our school sort of to be clear on our identity and who we are. So for example, with our scholars, right, we sort of have morning circles every single day in our classrooms, right? So that's the first thing after scholars come in, they have breakfast, they're sitting, and they're engaged in a morning circle. And we actually use that time to focus on social emotional learning and ensure that we're focusing on, lifting those pro social skills we want our students to really incorporate, right? And I think like that time of the morning where we're starting our day in a community space is powerful. It builds culture and it really ensures that our core values are being emphasized and that students understand who we are. And I would say the same thing that we do for students, we do the same thing for adults as well, right? So we have in staff huddles, right? Where, the staff is coming together. So for example, one of the things that we do is we have, these circle up moments, before we start PDs and there are shout outs that are being given, right? Where, folks are sort of affirming the things other people are doing that's making our community work, right? And another thing that we do is sort of like have I send out a Sunday email every Sunday. And in those emails are shout outs from leaders to teachers and even grade team leaders to their grade teams to really ensure that we're sort of celebrating what's working and helping everyone to align around our core values. And our core values spell great, and it stands for grit, resilience, excellence, accountability, and tenacity. And it's something that all scholars and adults know in our school. And so everything that we do really goes back to those core values to ensure that we are exemplifying them and that they become alive in our school community.
How do you feel like the culture has developed? I won't say changed, but developed from those early days of, your list of families and finding out your facility is not opening. Like, how do you feel like you've seen the culture develop amongst staff or students or both?
I would say that there's a stronger sense of community. I
Mm,
think that, there's a warmth in our school where our families know that we are a community and that we're there for each other. So it starts off with, okay, we're getting to know each other as a new school and new families. And it goes to, okay, sort of people really being vulnerable about like what's happening in their lives that could affect the way their children show up in school. And so from there, we're really able to respond to the needs of our families. Like for example, we've had families who were unfortunately in house fires, right? And like we sort of like showed up for them in really powerful ways that they really loved and ensure that they understood that, okay, we're not just here to teach your child how to read and write, but we care. We truly care about your child and who they are and the lives that they live outside this building. I remember when we were canvassing in our community a few weeks ago and we went to this parade where there were a lot of people there. And we saw like, one of our parents and their daughter. And when they saw us, trying to interact with, new families and new parents, they came over and they were so excited. They actually took some of our flyers and handed them out to other parents and say, hey, my child goes to South Shore Charter School and you need to be here too. And that was such a powerful moment because
yeah,
we were
that's
like,
super
wow,
cool.
like we are making an impact on families where they're able to recommend others to our school. And that's powerful. And I'll tell you that a large percentage of our families, over 50%, is through referrals, word of mouth, right? Because our families really feel this sense of community that their kids are thriving and they want others to experience the same.
Love it. Awesome. All right. So we've talked about systems, we've talked about culture. My last question on culture before we come to a close here is if you've identified challenges or things in the culture where, your team has bubbled up, hey, this needs to change. I mean, every organization has these different cultural challenges where you want to shift the culture one direction. What's your approach to that? Like, do you go back to the systems and say, "Hey, are our systems like creating this problem?" Or how do you approach that as a leader? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, I think that it's a powerful space when leaders can really come together and to reflect on what's working and what's not working, right? So, and we've done plenty of that. There were moments where we were like, okay, this is not working. We're going to
Right.
change it, right? For example, I tell you that when we first opened our doors, we had this elaborate plan for dismissal that we were going to use sort of like two different, exit points and that we are going to have one grade here, another grade there. And it did not work as well as we thought it was going to work because we have like siblings and it was just not the most effective way to do things, right? So what did we do? We sat together, we went to the drawing board and we were like, okay, this is not working. What can we try to make it even stronger? And I would say also not only sitting together as leaders, but pulling your teachers in as well, right? Pulling all stakeholders, pulling your operational team in, right? So to ensure that you have multiple voices who are able to speak to what they see from different perspectives. And at the end of the day, there's no ego in the room, right? The best ideas are going to be the ones that we're going to implement, right? So I would say that, yeah, there are going to be tons of times when, as a new school leader, you are trying to perfect systems. But if you're able to create this space where people can share their perspective and you can really put ego aside, you can accomplish so much and refine things that really works in a way that meets the needs of our scholars and our community.
I love it. Awesome. All right. So As we come to a wrap here, you've had a lot of experience, as you mentioned, as coming up through the charter community, leading classrooms, leading schools as a principal, and now you're on this founder's journey. Your organization continues to grow. Um, what resources have you found on this journey to be helpful to you as a leader that we can link in the show notes for others, or recommend to others who might be listening to this?
Sure. I would say any entity and organization that you can be a part of that sort of like pulls together other folks who are doing the same work that you're doing is amazing, right? So I'm going to plug the Charter School Growth Fund, for example, and New School Venture Fund, because those are spaces where, leaders from across the country are pulled together. And there is like a tremendous like energy around how can we be better. And that has been such an amazing part of how we've been able to experience the growth that we've experienced over the past few years. And I would also say Leverage Leadership by Paul Bambrick is also a really great text. I think there are a lot of really great, processes and resources there that I think can be implemented across the board, no matter where you find yourself across the country. And I would definitely say sort of like, tap in other leaders, right? And really ensuring that you have a spirit of like collaboration and not being afraid to reach out to those who are doing great work across the country.
Yeah, I love that you said that at the end there, because I think one of the things I've found, both in our work at ByQ, but also doing this podcast, is people are so eager and willing to help, and you don't have to learn it all from the school of hard knocks. There's a lot of other people who've gone through it before and are quick to open up their resources. So totally agree. Which brings me to my last question, which is, where can people connect with you, Dermoth? Where can they learn more about South Shore, the work you're doing? Where should we send folks?
Sure. So I have a personal LinkedIn account, professional one online, that people could search me up and send me a message. Our school also have their own personal LinkedIn account. Our website is also a great space to learn more about our school.
I love it. Awesome. All right. Well, Dermoth, thank you again for sharing your experience, for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by ByQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting byq.org/sign-up. ByQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.